Hola, buenos dias, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever the time is. I'm Bent, and I'm really pleased, I'm really honored to be here, sharing with you some of my thoughts on the reach and the potentials of school meal programs and food at school. I think over the past 5 years, we've seen a dramatic change in the way that we are speaking about food. Food is the single strongest component to optimize, or factor to optimize health and sustainability on Earth. Taken from this very influential Eat Lancet Commission report. And I think we've seen also what I have termed what I refer to as the planetary nutrition term. That think about 20 years ago, we would speak about, at the turn of the millennium, we will speak about the double burden of disease. We will speak about a focus on individual health. What is the relation between the food we eat and our individual health? Whereas nowadays, we will look towards 2030 and the climate goals, and in many countries, we would speak about a climate-friendly diet, and how is then the climate-friendly diet related to the nutrition-friendly diet? That's the question, and a much more focus on planetary health. Now, my agenda, let me give you a taste of what is the plan, what I'm going to speak about. First, a bit about the background. Food at school as part of welfare provision. Setting the scene from the cold north, where I am, to the Americas. Actually, it's not that cold because luckily summer has come here. But what I'm trying to say is, of course, there's a cultural context of when I speak about school meal programs in Europe and North of Europe. It's of course deeply rooted in the food culture that is here. I would say though that I will try to draw out some general principles, learning insights that is more or less generic and that fits globally. So a bit about why school meal programs have gotten so much attention. And I will let you in on some of the scientific evidence of the impact of school meal programs. How are we measuring the impact of school meal programs? And of course, obviously, that's the question all politicians ask. Does it have a beneficial impact? I will come back to that. And then a bit about this idea from canteen to classroom. You maybe noticed that I put it up front in my headline, that at school you can speak about what is going on in the canteen and what is going on in the classroom. Let me come back to that. And then finally, some summary and take-home messages. My point of departure is that I have been working with school meal programs and food at school over the past more or less 20 years. First in the Council of Europe, where we published this healthy eating at school, making healthy choices. Later on, I joined the Egberg group of the European Commission or European Union School Food Program. That's now the School Fruit, Vegetables and Milk Program, and I had the honor of being the chairman of both of these initiatives. So that's sort of the context that I will be speaking from. A bit about myself and where I am. This is a picture of the Nordics and the Baltics, and besides showing where on the globe that I am, it also illustrates some of my points on the huge diversity we can talk about when it comes to school meal programs and food at school. Myself, I'm living the green spot here. That's a small, tiny strait between Sweden and Denmark. I work in Denmark, in Copenhagen, but I live on the Swedish side. Now, there's a point I'm trying to make here, because the blue spots, this is Norway, this is Denmark, sorry about that. This is Denmark, here we have Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. And the point I'm trying to make is that what they do in Sweden, what they do in Finland, what they do in Estonia is free school meal provision for all kids. Basically, I think from 6 to 18 now. In Denmark and Norway, Blue countries, we have like sort of much more market style approach to school meal programs. It's left basically to the individual. I'm going to show you categorization here, which I think is very important when we speak just generically about school meal programs. There's a lot of difference between the collective approach here on the left side and the non-collective approach here on the right side. Now, let me try to explain that. In the yellow one here, we have all schools. You can imagine all schools, let's say in Sweden or in Finland, could be Brazil as well, but I will speak mainly from a Nordic European perspective. So all schools will provide meals to all kids in those schools. Now, in the Danish context and the Norwegian as well, now some schools will provide food for some kids. So imagine that some kids at one school that provides the food, they will buy the food. Then, of course, you dilute a lot. You don't get the same. You simply don't get the same impact. You don't get the same effect. Provided, of course, that the foods, the meals that you provide are nutritionally superior. I will come back to that. That is at least the case in most countries. So in all these cases, the white cases, then there's no food there at the school, but it's provided from the family. Provided from the family in the lunchbox, or you leave it to the kids to buy some fruits in a tuck shop or in a vending machine, or even go to the street and buy the food there. So I think that's an important point when we speak about what is the potential of school meal programs to make a nutritional difference for kids. Now, a word about this idea of canteen or classroom. What do I mean by that? I mean, on the left side, you see the canteen. You see the provision side. That is the food that is provided that could be a program, whether you have to pay for it or you get it for free. Same thing. It's provided from this. In Europe, as I said, we have even school fruit program, school fruit scheme. We also have a school milk scheme. In some cases, we have breakfast clubs taking care of the start of the day. You have tuck shops and vending machines, and you have, in some cases, you have kids allowed to leave the school and buy competitive foods in the street in food outlets adjacent to the school. Now, my point is that that's one thing. That's what you provide, and of course, eating healthy does good for your health. But what you do in the classroom, that teaches you how to do good. That teaches you knowledge, teaches you skills, competences, and that's one of the points I'm going to try to make later on here. What are classroom activities? What are curricular activities? What are effectful, impactful activities you can do for your brain rather than for your body? Hands-on food activities, home economics facilities, on-campus school gardening, off-campus school gardening, cooking lesson activities, taste education activities, edible schoolyard activities, farm-to-school links. There's a lot you can do, and that is one of the points that I will be trying to make, is that one thing is good, you provide food, but you need to do the classroom activities as well. Now, I try to illustrate that in this model, because obviously when you have a catering staff, a food service staff that does the food and cooking, you have of course a direct relation between the catering staff and the kids that are eating. Obviously, you have a direct link between the teachers in the classroom and the children, but you don't necessarily have any direct links between those two professions, the catering staff that is doing the cooking and the teachers that is doing the classroom activities. And that's one of my points, that you need to make that link, you need to create that synergy if you want the full potential of school meal programs. And actually, I speak here, I would actually prefer to speak about food at school rather than school meal programs, because school meal programs is simply only the provision. Food at school also include, in my optic, the curricular activities. Now, the global agenda, and sorry for that, I know this is an old picture for those of you that remember Tony Blair. You probably know Jamie Oliver. This is Jamie Oliver, Tony Blair. This is from 2007. Michelle Obama, you probably remember. I don't know if Lula da Silva is here. I don't think so, but he is one of the drivers between the very ambitious Brazilian program, the PNAE. And in the US, you have the National School Lunch Program. In UK, it's called the School Food Trust. So these are initiatives that illustrate this huge and dramatic increase in interest, political interest in doing good through the school meal programs, doing good through food at school. This year is actually a very special year. We have the Food Systems Summit 2021 that is driven by the United Nations, the FAO, and we are celebrating sort of food systems approach to change the way we behave when it comes to food. And they speak about game changers. Global homegrown school feeding is a global game changer for children and food systems. Now, why is that? What is a game changer? A game changer is of course, a dramatic change, but it illustrates the fact that political systems, that governments, that politicians think about food at school as something as a good option when it comes to tackling obesity, but also when it comes to promoting sustainable food behavior. Now, let me show you, and if you take a look, and this was from in 2013, the FAO, the World Food Program, started to do an annual state of the play. You can take a look in the latest version. There's a 2020 edition, but they have been annually publishing a state of the play when it comes to school feeding worldwide. So it gives some very interesting figures. You now have a statistics of what is going on in the world when it comes to food at school. You see here 93% of governments implement school feeding in conjunction with complementary health and nutrition interventions. Now, 1 in every 2 primary school children in the world, they receive a school meal. And most interestingly, here you can see from over the 7 past years, we have seen an increase by close to 10%. The number of children receiving school meals grew by that amount. So let me just jump back once again. 2007, there was this interesting report from the project called PORP. It's an awful word, but it stands for Policy Option Responding to Growing Obesity. Now, how to tackle obesity, why SMP might be a game changer. What they did, yes, you can see, they simply interviewed a lot of people, a lot of different stakeholders, and then basically they asked the question, what do you think? What do you think we should do to tackle obesity? And they spoke to citizens, to young people, to food service operators, to food service industry, to food industry, to retailers, policymakers, health professionals, a lot of different people, probably 20 as I recall. And interestingly, if you ask a broad range of food system actors about how to tackle obesity, you will find, not surprisingly, there's a huge difference in opinions. There's much of a disagreement, but when you ask about taking action in school, they would more or less agree, all of them, what's not to like. So I think this partly explains this idea of there's many things you need to do, but where can you do those things? At school, there's a much of a consensus on the fact you can do something at school. I try to, and I already introduced the idea, one of my points, that it's very, very dependent on how you do your food at school. What do you actually do? So I try to make this model as a way to explain program theory or something like that. that if you want to be healthier, this is your anthropometry. You want to lose weight or you want to decrease your BMI, this is the sort of the final outcome you think about. Then you need to start up here, knowledge. You need to provide knowledge. You need to know what is the right thing to do. You need to know that you should definitely eat 5 or 6 a day, pieces of fruit and vegetables. But that's not enough. You also need to change your attitude. You need to want to do right. You need the affection. It's not enough that you only know. You also need to think this is right. This is the right thing to do. So there needs to be an intention to act. Then doing this, then you probably end up doing something good, actually eating more healthy, actually eating your 5 a day, and actually eating so that with a healthy eating index, I'll come back to that, you will find improvement. Doing that for a couple of years will probably, hopefully, change your anthropometry. That is, if you are overweight, then you will probably lose a couple of kilos. But that's not a thing you do overnight. That's depending on that you're doing this for a long term. So I think this is a good model to explain for food at school to make a difference when it comes to good nutrition. I just did to illustrate, to underline my point on this dramatic increase in the interest of school meal programs. If you look at PubMed, if you look at Google Scholar, if you look at ORCID, you will find these number of papers on school meal programs. And don't worry, and you probably already figured out, I didn't read all of them, but it's just to show that there's a lot out there. And let me just explain how do you do this kind of, and not all of them, of course, are intervention studies, but intervention studies is a very good way to demonstrate the fact that either you improve your anthropometry or you improve your eating patterns, what I call the dietary eating index or healthy eating index that you have here, or you increase the dietary knowledge, or you decrease your BMI. So the way you do this is that you do an intervention and you do a baseline measurement and you do a follow-up. And in the ideal world, and this is completely thought up example, made up example, but in the ideal world, what you then expect, hopefully, is that from baseline to follow up, you will see an increase in those two, and you will see a decrease in BMI. That is what every interventionist, including myself, would expect or would hope for in the ideal world. Now, over here is a very important component. This is what you do. I refer to this as your bandwidth. That is whether you are doing a single or a multi-component intervention. That is what you can do at school. You can do an environmentally oriented intervention, food service intervention, I call it, but you can also intervene in the wider community, in the family, in the community. You can also do behavioral modifications, and you can do nutrition education. Only doing nutrition education, I will come to that later, is not going to help you. You need to do more things. And then, as you can see, the yellow one is on top. Why did I put that on top? Because in many intervention studies, you will intervene both on the food side, but also on the physical activity, the PA side, because, as you know, physical activity and healthy eating goes hand in hand when it comes to improving health. So, as in all the fields of study, when you have a dramatic increase in the number of intervention studies, sooner or later, researchers that don't know what to do, they would start asking the question, and also, of course, the politicians would ask the question, well, you're doing all these intervention studies at school. Are they effectful? Are they impactful? Are they working as they should do? So this is when researchers start doing what we call systematic reviews. They take a huge sample, and as you saw in the previous slide, there's a lot to pick from. This is actually, I think, 15 years ago. That one of the first overviews we did on intervention studies. We found them in the databases. We identified them. We started to register or to record what were the focus. Was it diabetes type 2? Was it overweight and obesity? Was it cancer? Was it fruit and vegetables? These intervention studies had different goals, but they were all intervening on the food side, and some of them also on the physical activity side. Then, of course, the next question is, and this just want to point to this very interesting study. This is from 2014. Very interesting studies looking at 14 studies, and most of them was from including kids. And the important finding here is that interventions were found to be ineffective in lower socioeconomic position participants if they only focused on individual behavioral change. And important point also is that studies were shown to be effective primarily when they focused on community-based strategies and when they included structural changes to the environment. Very, very important learning insight. Now, I introduced this idea of a healthy eating index, and this is how you normally intervention studies, because you don't want to work on the nutrition or on the nutrient side. You want to work on the food side, and then you want to be able to say, is this person eating healthier than this person? And then this is where you invent the idea of a healthy eating index. Let me give you an example. You would say, well, if you are eating more than 5 servings of vegetables a day, you will get the score of 10. If you eat 0, you will get the score of 0. And the same thing all over. Cereal, more than 15 grams a day, you will get the score of 10. This is how you create a healthy index. And question is then, and that's a very good question that many politicians would ask me, and many of my co-researchers or colleagues would ask me, okay, is there a nutritional superiority of the school meal? Why is it that we want the school meal to take over from the lunchbox? This is a thought-up example. On the left side, you see the healthy eating index here from 1 to 10, and this is what you find in most studies. So there is some exceptions actually from Mexico. I'll show them later on. There's quite some difference. Some lunch bags are unhealthy, some lunch bags are quite healthy, depending on the family. Unlike if you take, so this is as I said, a thought-up example. You have 5 families here, and here you have 5 schools. And what you find normally, because most countries would have a threshold on the quality of the school meal provided needs to be of a certain level. So most of them there would be small differences, but normally what you find is that if the school serve officially some kind of school food, then it normally complies with the regulation. And that, of course, does not include the vending machines necessarily, and doesn't include the tuck shops that you might have, but officially provided school food is normally of a higher nutritional quality. I tried to look up a bit of what is the situation in Mexico actually, and I found 2 studies, one from 2011 and one from 2018. And as you can see here, in 2011, foods brought from home were of higher nutritional quality. I translate that in the way that you didn't have 10 years ago nutritional recommendations for schools, or maybe you had, but they were not followed. Still here, this is from 2018, you'll find that only 27% of foods were complying with nutritional standards. So that is of course totally dependent on whether you actually have a school meal program or school meal quality standard. I would argue most countries have that. You see here some examples, and the number of national nutritional recommendation standards are increasing. Let me give you an example of, this is from a recent study we did. How are you actually doing this kind of intervention studies? And I think that's a very important question if you want to answer, is it economically, is it financially feasible to actually go for school meal programs as a game changer? Is it actually providing benefits? Good school meal programs obviously cost investments and money. So is it worthwhile the effort? This is what we did last year, reviewing school meal intervention program. An example. Now, I don't want to be too technically oriented. I just want to say that you can do this intervention studies in more ways. The golden standard, which we decided needs to give a score of 3, is a randomized controlled cluster trial. What people sometimes are doing is a pre-test, post-test. They simply measure what is baseline, what is follow-up. Our problem with that is that you don't know whether that's dependent on the school. So, which is why you need a trial, you need a comparison, which in some cases then becomes a control trial where you take 2 schools, and then you can start comparing those. And in a control trial, you will simply try to match them, whereas, that's my important point, whereas in a randomized trial, you will simply randomize the schools and say, you will have the intervention, you won't. So this is how you then start going through all the studies, and you just get a small taste sample here. So every study would be 1 line, and then you will start looking at what was the age, which age group did you intervene in? What was the sample size? Of course, if you have a sample size of close to 1,400, you would expect this to be of higher quality than if you only have 180. Of course, you would expect that if you intervene for 1.5 years, you would have much more effect, or you would have more effect than if you only intervene for 6 years. So I think this illustrates some of the technicalities, some of the challenges that is related to doing this kind of intervention studies. But the intervention studies are extremely important because they try to answer the question, are school meal programs worthwhile doing? And as in any systematic review, you will start this to show you how do you pick. We ended up, in our paper, we ended up with 42 studies from the past, I believe, 10 years. You start up with looking at PubMed, and then you will find a lot of studies, and then you will look at Cochrane library, and then you will look at the Web of Science, and you will have a lot of studies. And then you will start applying your inclusion criteria and your exclusion criteria, and then you will end up with a sample of 42. Now, I just introduced up front, or in my opening talk, I introduced the idea of canteen to classroom. What do I mean? Let me expand a bit about that on that. From body to brain, or food as provision in the way that we speak about school meal programs, or food as education. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of interventions where we try to move from the canteen to the classroom. I'm not saying we shouldn't concentrate on the quality of school meal programs in the canteen. I'm saying we need to do both. So think about a school as a canteen and a classroom. And if you miss the teachers and the education and the literacy training, you're going to miss something important. 2 examples of one is what we call the food as nature, where we try to link the topic of food production, food consumption with a concern for nature. That nature is out there for us to enjoy, but also for us to grow or to cultivate. So that is one example. And then the second one, first one called Dagmar, the other one is I'm going to show you some pictures. I'm not going to do that much of a talking, but let me walk you through these examples. So I think this illustrates how can you understand nature, how can you understand the wild, how can you understand cultivation, and how can you teach children that when we want food and when we need food, it needs to be grown, it needs to be picked, and that is sooner or later going to affect the nature. This is an example of a growing campaign we did, and those two examples illustrate that you go from teaching, from classroom teaching, from explaining to actually doing. So it's teaching versus action. Let me show you my second example, which is an attempt. I'm going to show you 3 pictures, which is an attempt to link the teaching, the nutritional efforts, the classroom efforts, to link to this very important agenda that we have in many countries, that kids need to be taught about the STEM principles, science, technology, engineering, math. They need to understand engineering. They need to understand digital principles. They need to be creative. They need to be design thinking oriented. This very, very important agenda is running in many schools. And what we have been able to do here is to attach, to team up with this agenda and say, well, the food part, we're gonna add a scientific component here. So I hope I expect that this picture illustrates how indoor growing with artificial lighting is one example how you can attach to this agenda, measuring different biosignals from the growing unit is another example. And if you want to take understand more about the SESAM project, you can take a look at this website. Here's another example. Growing aquaponics, which still or again is artificial growing. You do fish farming and microgreen farming at the same time. Is another example of how you can add scientific digital component to the teaching and still have it food oriented. Third example and last example, don't worry, is the coding of a farm bot. Now, what is a farm bot? That is a raised bed that's in the growing unit, but it's not a standard growing unit. It's simply fitted with a robot. So this guy is, I think, 13, I don't recall. He will be sitting down programming the robot to actually do all the things you don't want to do yourself. You don't want to make the seeding, you don't want to make the watering, you don't want to make the cutting of the final yield. You want the robot to do that. So a third example of how, again, you can attach to the science and to the digital agenda. I think my time is coming to an end, so I want to list some of the take-home messages, some of my conclusions. I want to ask or try to answer the question, school meals, are they a potential game changer in the way, in the sense that UN is speaking about, in the sense that politicians are speaking about this? Well, partly yes, partly. Good evidence we find school meals are, generally speaking, of higher quality than lunch breaks. So there's a good reason, there's a good rationale behind intervening in the public space. School meal interventions can improve proxies of healthy eating. The potential of school meal programs to make a change is totally dependent on how much you do. If you only do an education, you're not going to be very successful. You need to intervene also in the food environment. You need to comply with the standards. You need also to attach, to link the education with from canteen to classroom. School meal programs need to include environmental components, structural components. Some evidence we find expanding from canteen to classroom have shown promising results. There's more research to be done, but we are on the right path. School meals can lead to some improvement of anthropometric indicators, keeping in mind that anthropometric indicators is your weight, your degree of obesity, or your degree of overweight, but it takes some time. Don't expect miracles. School meals work better among the youngest we've found in our study. School meals can improve proxies of learning capacity. Learning capacity, academic achievement, academic performance, however we refer to that, what is happening in the classroom. So there's a beneficial effect of actually eating good and eating healthy. I think with that, I'm going to close my presentation, and thanks for your attention. And I know that this is offline, but I would be happy to answer any questions. You have my email here. You can team up with me on the LinkedIn. And then I wish you just thank you for your attention, and wish you a fruitful and an impactful further conference. Thanks a lot.